I woke up in the morning in the center of Lahti in hotel room number 314 at about 6:52, even though the alarm had been set to ring at 7. I looked at the corner of the ceiling where there was a small, almost unnoticeable crack, and wondered whether it had appeared during the building's renovation or was simply the result of years of quiet settling. I rose slowly. My feet touched the carpet, which had a fold near the edge, about 3 centimeters wide, feeling different underfoot than the rest of it. I walked to the bathroom. The light came on with a small delay, about a second or a second and a half after pressing the switch. In the mirror, the light fell diagonally across my cheek, leaving the area around my right eye in partial shadow. I brushed my teeth, moving the brush slowly from right to left, as if trying to make sure every spot would be properly cleaned. I thought of the bus ticket I had printed the previous day in the Hotel Lobe. I decided to wear the light blue shirt I had packed carefully in my bag. When I took it out, I felt the texture of the fabric under my fingers. Thin cotton, a little rough, but soft to the touch. The collar had bent slightly during the trip, and I checked every seam, every stitch, looking carefully to see that nothing had wrinkled too much. I noticed a tiny stitch mark on the right edge of the collar, maybe 3 millimeters long, and wondered whether it had appeared in the suitcase or during washing. Then I took the iron, which I had already checked in the lobby and noticed to be slightly dusty underneath. I plugged it in and waited until the small red indicator light blinked ready. I started ironing with the collar first, moving the iron slowly, one stroke at a time, carefully over the edges and seams. I felt the fabric warm up, the creases starting to smooth out, but I didn't rush. I watched myself in the mirror, wondering whether the collar was now properly aligned with the shoulder line. The ironing continued down the front of the shirt. I spent a little longer on the left chest area because of a stubborn fold that didn't smooth out immediately. I noticed the right sleeve needed several passes since the seam was slightly off. I thought about how many times I had ironed a similar shirt before and wondered whether the shade of light blue had changed with each wash. Finally, the collar and body of the shirt looked almost even, and I laid it carefully back on the ironing board. Next, I took the trousers. They were dark blue, made of fairly stiff fabric, and I checked the pockets to make sure nothing was left inside. I thought to myself that this entire ritual of dressing, though slow and detailed, was somehow calming. At the same time, I noticed my fingers were a little stiff from the warmth of the iron and the quiet repetition. But that was good. It gave me time to observe everything around me, even the smallest details in the room. The room was silent, but still full of faint sounds if one listened carefully. From outside came, from time to time, the soft thud of a car pulling up by the street. Somewhere far down the corridor, perhaps in a neighboring room, doors closed with a metallic clink. Beneath the floor, faint rumbling echoed, perhaps the elevator motor moving slowly. Amidst all this, the room had its own soundscape. From the air vent came a very soft hiss, almost inaudible, but steady enough to form a slow, continuous rhythm, barely perceptible, yet always present. I stood in front of the mirror and took a brush. It was wooden, old, with small scratches on the surface, but the bristles were still a Springer. I began brushing slowly, starting from the hair ends and gradually working toward the roots. Each stroke produced a faint, soft rustle as the bristles moved through the hair and touched the scalp. I heard myself humming in a low voice, almost whispering, but the sound didn't disappear. It stayed, resonating within the walls and ceiling of the room. The resonance of the hum was peculiar. The sound seemed to move inside the skull, first behind the forehead, then at the crown and down to the jaw. It was like a faint vibration whose exact location was impossible to pinpoint. I wondered for a moment whether this was normal or if I was just paying too much attention. I kept brushing, still humming softly, and with each motion the sound changed slightly, resonating in new spots, vibrating behind the ears. When the brush passed across my left cheek, I heard the faint crack of the furniture, the subtle sigh of the floorboards, and the gentle hiss of the air vent. My smile broke for a moment, then returned, faint and quiet. I wondered how many times I had ever heard my own voice inside my skull like this, and felt at the same time that all the sounds of the room were merging into one whole. The car's thud, the metallic clink, the elevator's hum, the vent's hiss, the brush's rustle, and the low hum of my own voice. Together they formed a slow, focused rhythm that seemed to stretch and contract at once. I brushed my hair more and more slowly, focusing on each bristle and the sound every movement created. I noticed that the resonance was strongest around my left ear, and I wondered whether it was due to the shape of my skull or just coincidence. I smiled quietly to myself and felt the vibration travel under my jawbone, spreading forward like a small tremor that never fully stopped. I got up from the chairs and stood in the middle of the room, looking around. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning. The soft light blue shirt lay partly on the ironing board. The dark blue trousers were neatly placed on the chair, and the glass of water on the nightstand was exactly where I had set it. I smoothed the shirt's armpit lightly, feeling nothing special through the fabric, just its ordinary, slightly rough surface. I took a deep breath and wondered if I was truly ready to leave the room. The door, the only way out, looked ordinary, yet strangely significant. Its handle gleamed faintly in the dim light. The cold metal seemed inviting, but also vaguely threatening. I stepped closer, noting every small detail of movement. The faint creak of the floorboard under my weight, the tiny wrinkle in the carpet brushing against my toes, and the quiet sigh of the air vent continuing its steady rhythm in the background. I reached for the handle slowly. My fingertips brushed the cold metal. I felt its smooth surface and thought of how many times I had held a handle before in other places, other rooms, other cities. How often that small gesture, opening a door, had meant something important or nothing at all. I took another breath, listening to the room's sounds, the muffled car noise from outside, the steady hiss of ventilation, the faint creak of the floor, and the lingering whisper of the brush through my hair. Then I stopped. I drifted into thought for a moment and realized I wasn't sure if I was ready to step out. What would it mean right now? Outside was a street, traffic, perhaps people, or perhaps not. What if something was different from what I imagined? Or what if everything was exactly the same as it had always been, yet somehow new? I felt the cool metal of the handle against my fingertips, but something within me held the movement back. I turned slowly away. I walked a few steps back to the center of the room and looked around again. The mirror reflected me. I saw my hair slightly messy, even though I had brushed it several times. I breathed shallowly and felt the resonance of that quiet hum again inside my skull, vibrating softly from behind the forehead down to the jaw. All the sounds of the room, the creaking floor, the hissing vent, the distant cars, the cold metal of the handle, merged into one unified presence, something familiar yet distant. I thought once more about what it would mean to grab the handle, turn it, and open the door. It would be a small gesture, but a meaningful one. Yet, I didn't do it. Instead, I looked at the corners of the room, the light of the lamps, the spines of books, the water glass reflecting a dim shimmer onto the walls. I breathed slowly and deliberately, feeling each motion and each sound wave touching my ears and my skull. I stopped again near the door, brushed my side with the soft fabric of my sleeve, and thought about how many moments I had spent exactly like this, hesitating, considering, yet not deciding. Once more I took hold of the handle, my fingers wrapped around it, but I didn't turn it. Inside my head came a small hum, a low sound resonating within my skull, spreading through my whole head, pausing behind my ears and returning again. I stepped back a few paces and sat down on the chair, breathing slowly. The room was as familiar and as strange as it had been in the morning. Every detail, the brush bristles, the shirt, the water glass, the creaking floor, the quiet hiss of ventilation, seemed to wait for something, though I wasn't ready. My gaze wandered along the edges of the room and stopped at the TV remote lying lightly on the surface of the nightstand to the right side. Its edges were slightly dusty, but otherwise smooth and cool to the touch. I picked it up and pressed the button slowly, listening to each faint click as the button sank and rose again. For a moment, nothing happened, until a faint light appeared in the corner of the screen, and a low hum, perhaps from the device's circuitry, filled the silence of the room. At first the image was black. Then text slowly appeared. Nature documentary, Secrets of the Forests. The edges of the image dimmed slightly, and a voice began. A calm male voice speaking about the leaves of trees and how they change color with the seasons. The tone was so steady that its rhythm felt slow and elongated, almost blending with the hiss of the ventilation and the creak of the floor. I looked closely at the screen. The first shot showed a large oak tree, its leaves swaying gently in the wind. The camera angle changed so slowly that I had time to notice every branch and every small detail of the leaf veins. I thought about how many times I had seen leaves move outside on the street, but had never paid attention to each individual leaf in such detail. How many tiny notches there were on the edges, how each color shifted slightly into another, how the outlines curled differently. The voice continued its narration, and I smiled quietly to myself. A small, low sound that resonated in my skull, the same way as earlier while brushing my hair. A soft rustle sounded as I pressed the remote slightly differently, and the colors on the screen changed tone for a moment when the brightness adjusted. The trees in the picture slowly turned to birches. Their white trunks stood out sharply, every line and scar on the bark visible. I thought about how many times I had seen birch trees outdoors, yet never studied the details of their bark for this long. Then a small stream appeared on the screen. The surface of the water moved slowly, light reflecting on each droplet that rippled across. I listened to the motion of the water, the faint trickling and bubbling, and felt that the sound blended with the other noises in the room, the hiss of the ventilation, the small crack of the floor, the quiet click of the remote's buttons. Together they formed a stillness that somehow continued moving. Each animal's appearance on the screen took its time. First came a small squirrel climbing slowly along a tree trunk. It paused for a moment, looked around, and then continued upward. I observed every detail of its motion, the position of its paws, the tail twitching slightly with the branch's sway, the alertness of its eyes. I wondered whether the squirrel was aware of the watcher or not, and at the same time I felt the resonance of my hum within my skull growing stronger again, a small low vibration traveling from behind the forehead down to the jaw and back. A quiet forest path appeared next. Sunlight filtered through the trees, forming tiny patterns on the ground. I watched how the light fell upon every stone and branch, how the shadows shifted very slowly, and I listened to the calm narration about roots and the layers of leaves. I took a deep breath and felt that the room's silence and the slow rhythm of the television's sound together formed a single pulse, peaceful and unhurried. I began to wonder if I should turn off the TV. My hand moved slowly over the remote, fingertips tracing the buttons. The off button was cold and smooth, its edges slightly worn, carrying the memory of earlier moments. I wondered what would happen if I pressed it now. The silence of the room would fill only with the hum of ventilation, the creak of the floor, and my own breathing. Would that be a moment of calm emptiness, or would it feel lonely and bare when the television went dark? My finger stopped over the button. I looked at the screen, and every tree, every leaf, every slow animal movement returned to my mind. How many times had I seen this same image already, and how many times had I heard this gentle, quiet hum in the room? I also wondered what would happen next if the television went off. Would something new appear, or would everything just remain in the stillness of the room? Time passed. My hand simply rested on the button, but I didn't press it. I breathed slowly and felt again that low resonance inside my skull, moving from behind the forehead, through the jaw. I studied other details of the room. The edge of the nightstand, the glass of water reflecting light irregularly, the brush left on the table, and the shirt I had carefully folded after ironing. They all seemed to be waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. Then I decided to change the channel slowly, as if cautiously. My finger slid to the right. A small click marked the change, and the screen brightened for a moment. But then only text appeared. No signal / no CI module. It was bright and white on a dark background, clear, fixed, motionless. I watched it for a while, a faint hum resonating in my head, blending with the TV's electronic murmur. The text didn't change. No color, no motion, no sound. It remained there, steady, and at the same time meaningful, precise, detailed, as every leaf or stone in the documentary had been. I stared at it intently and felt the room's silence envelop me completely. The faint hiss of ventilation continued. The floor creaked slightly, perhaps from my movement, or perhaps on its own, and every little sound stood out, sharp and separate, Remaining there before the screen felt natural. My finger lifted from the remote and simply rested on it. I didn't press any button. I kept looking at the text, its sharp edges, its constant white tone, and the way it stood out against the dark background. I thought about how many times I had looked at something that never changed, yet still felt meaningful. How many moments in life were filled with these still, detailed, slow observations. I stood up and picked up the remote. I pressed the power button slowly and heard a small click as the television turned off. The screen went black instantly, and the light in the room seemed suddenly more even, without the reflection from the display. I looked for a moment at the remote left on the table, its tiny scratches and slightly worn edges, and placed it carefully back where it had been. I turned toward the chair on which I had laid the freshly ironed shirt. The fabric was smooth and stiff, a sharp fold running along the sleeves and seams from ironing. I extended my hand and picked it up carefully, first by the shoulders, then supporting the lower edge so it wouldn't slip to the floor. The motion was slow. My right hand lifted the fabric a little, the left followed, supporting it. I held the shirt gently against my chest, making sure the collar sat right, and slid my right arm into the sleeve. My fingertips found their way through the narrow tube of fabric until they emerged from the cuff. The forearm followed, then the whole arm, and the cloth glided over my skin, smooth, cool. I did the same with the left sleeve, even more carefully as the fabric wanted to twist slightly. Finally, both arms were inside, and I lifted my shoulders slightly to let the shirt settle evenly. I began buttoning it. My left hand's thumb and forefinger took hold of the small plastic button, and the right guided it toward the hole. The motion was small and precise. A press, a gentle push, until the button slipped through. Each button repeated the same sequence of movements from the bottom upward until the collar. The last button was the hardest. The hole was tight, and my fingers had to twist a little before it clicked into place. The collar rose neatly around my neck, forming a symmetrical triangle. Next, I took the trousers. They had been folded neatly on the corner of the bed, the legs side by side, the sharp crease from ironing still visible. I lifted them with both hands, examined their length for a moment, and carefully slid my leg through the first pant leg. The knee bent, the ankle extended, and the fabric moved along the skin of my shin slowly. The same motion followed with the other leg. A small lift, the foot steady against the carpet, the turn of the ankle, the stretch of the toes, and the fabric settling down into place. When I had pulled the trousers up, I fastened the waist button. My fingers searched for the small hole, pushed the button through, and then pulled the zipper up, its teeth locking together with a dry, faint click. I straightened the legs with my hands, pulling the fabric slightly downward to keep the crease straight. After that, I looked for the socks. They were folded together on the edge of the bed, rolled as a pair. I picked them up, unrolled one, and put it on my right foot. My hand gripped the upper edge, stretched the fabric open, and my foot slid inside from the toes onward. My fingers guided the cloth along the shape of the foot, over the instep, around the ankle, up to the calf. The fabric was soft, thin cotton, slightly elastic, gently pressing against the skin. I repeated the same with the left sock. The stretch, the direction of the toes, the smooth sliding of the foot inside, and finally adjusting the fabric so it wouldn't bunch up. When both socks were on, I stood up and looked at myself in the room's mirror. The shirt's collar was straight, the sleeves fell to the right length at my wrists, the trousers draped evenly over my socked feet, and the socks themselves covered my ankles neatly. The surfaces of the clothes were smooth, free of wrinkles, just as I had wanted. The room was quiet. Only the gentle hum of ventilation filled the background. The glass of water on the nightstand glinted in the lamplight, and the brush I had left on the table was still there, its bristles pointing straight upward, casting a small sawtooth shadow on the surface. The carpet's pattern was still the same, geometric and repeating, and in its surface I could see faint indentations where I had stood and moved earlier. The act of dressing was complete, motion by motion, detail by detail. I stood still for a moment, watching how the clothes settled around my body, how the fabric moved with the rhythm of my breathing, how the buttons, zippers, and folds formed a calm, orderly whole. As I stood there, in front of the mirror, fully dressed, socks neatly covering my feet, my thoughts wandered toward the shoes waiting on the floor. They stood by the door, side by side, their toes slightly turned inward, as if facing each other. The leather surface shone faintly in the lamplight, and the laces hung half loose, reminding me that before leaving there was one small but final task, slipping my feet in and tying the knots. I took a step toward them, but stopped halfway. My eyes slid past the shoes to the bed, still smooth and untouched, except for the faint marks left by the trousers I had just ironed and put on. The white sheets were tight and even, the pillows showing small irregular shadows in the lamplight. The bed looked both inviting and final. If I lay down, the direction of all movement would change completely. I stood still and began to weigh which choice was right. Putting on the shoes seemed logical, consistent. I had already gone through the entire sequence of dressing. Shirt, trousers, socks, and shoes would naturally complete it. But that would mean leaving, opening the hotel room door, stepping into the corridor and pressing the elevator buttons. The thought of moving outward felt heavy, laborious, as if every small stage of it were a ritual in itself. The bed, on the other hand, was closer. It was silent, waiting, and lying down would require nothing more than turning a small step and shifting the body's weight downward. I imagined how the soft mattress would yield, how the surface of the pillow would mold around my head, and how the lamplight would slowly fade through my eyelids into a gentle reddish hue. I turned my gaze back to the shoes. Their black surface looked harder now, more formal, as if belonging to some larger commitment. The thin lace ends rested on the carpet, slightly twisted into irregular spirals. If I were to bend down and pick one up, the motion would be simple, but would involve many small repetitions. Sliding the foot in, adjusting the laces, tying a knot, then the other shoe, another knot. A sequence of acts before the final departure. My eyes returned to the bed. Its surface looked softer. I thought about the moment when my weight would sink down, how the fabric and padding would yield, and my breathing would deepen. I was still fully dressed, but that didn't feel like an obstacle. The fabric might wrinkle, but that wouldn't be irreversible. In fact, it might even feel comforting to let the freshly pressed clothes sink for a while into the soft surface. I kept thinking the shoes represented movement, order, the completion of preparation. The bed offered stillness, A pause, the sense that everything could remain unfinished, yet still somehow complete. I stood there, long enough to notice my breathing deepen, slow down. My hands hung by my sides, and my gaze moved slowly between the bed and the shoes. Finally, I took a step toward the bed. The motion was calm. The left foot moved first, then the right followed. The carpet's soft surface gave a slight spring with each step. I approached the edge of the bed, extended my hand and touched the sheet. The fabric felt cool and smooth beneath my fingertips, and when I pressed slightly, the mattress gave a gentle, yielding response. I turned, placed my knee on the edge, and let the weight of my body sink down. The mattress lowered first under my hips, then my back, until finally my shoulders settled into place. The pillow received my head and shaped itself around it. The sheets were cool, but their smoothness warmed quickly as my body blended into their surface. I looked for a moment at the room around me, the lamplight, the glass on the table, the edge of the mirror reflecting part of the wall and its small shadows. Everything stayed still, unmoving. Then I closed my eyes slowly. Through the lids, the light turned soft, diffuse, gradually fading away. My breathing was calm, each exhale carrying away a small portion of wakefulness. The muscles in my body relaxed little by little, first the shoulders, then the arms, then the legs, until everything seemed to settle. The bed was soft, the surroundings quiet, and my eyes stayed closed. Thoughts drifted away, one after another, and the moment became light, still, as if the whole room were breathing quietly along with me. My eyelids closed, and the light turned first into a soft glow, then into a diffused shadow, until that too disappeared. My breathing continued in an even rhythm, but the pace no longer felt entirely my own. It was as if someone else were breathing slowly in the same room, parallel to me, very close, though no one could be seen. Time began to dissolve. I didn't know whether I had lain there for a minute or an hour. The mattress's indentation felt at times deep, at times light, as if I were floating on the surface of water. The pillow still shaped itself around my head, but sometimes it felt firmer, sometimes almost gone, as though I were resting only on air. Sounds reached me from somewhere, perhaps the faint hiss of the ventilation, perhaps from the corridor beyond the door, or maybe only the inner noise I heard as my own pulse. The sound stretched and distorted, turning into a single humming background. I couldn't tell whether it truly existed or was produced by my mind, which no longer held firmly to the border between wakefulness and sleep. I saw shadows above the bed, moving even though the lamp's light hadn't changed. They curled slowly, crept along the wall, stretched, vanished, and returned. Were my eyes open or closed? I didn't know, for the images appeared with equal clarity in both states. I no longer felt my hands resting on the blanket, though I knew they were there. Sometimes they seemed heavy, sometimes absent, as if I didn't possess them at all. After some time, if time truly passed, I noticed I might have stood up. I didn't remember the motion, but somehow I was on the floor, and the carpet's geometric pattern appeared, distorted, stretched. I felt the surface pressing faintly beneath my soles, yet at the same time the bed's softness drew me back, as though I were in both places at once. My gaze turned toward the table where the glass of water stood, but its shape kept shifting, sometimes clear and defined, sometimes translucent and hazy. Sometimes it felt like only the idea of a glass. I turned toward the mirror, or perhaps I only imagined it. There was a figure that resembled me, but moved in a slightly different rhythm. When I lifted my head, the reflection lingered for a moment, and when I lowered my gaze, it kept looking back. The reflected face was not entirely clear. The light distorted it, forming extra shadows across the cheeks and forehead. I tried to count my steps, but I couldn't tell whether the body was moving or only the thought of movement. The color of the wall changed from pale gray to darker, then almost bluish, and back again. The corridor beyond the door seemed to beckon, yet the bed pulled at me in return. Perhaps I was still lying down. I pressed my head deeper into the pillow, though a moment ago I had felt my feet on the floor. Everything merged, the bed's softness, the carpet's pattern, the wall shadows, and the mirror's blurred image. Time no longer followed order. Moments broke apart, began again, jumped backward and forward without logic. I heard a sound. It might have been my own breathing, or someone opening a door in the corridor, or maybe the TV remote falling from the table. The sound was sharp at first, then drawn out, and finally it became a long hum that merged with all the other noises. A thought rose. Perhaps I should open my eyes, but when I tried, I wasn't sure they weren't already open. The room appeared just as dim whether my eyes were closed or not. The same lamp, the same glass, the same mirror, but they didn't stay still. They shimmered, shifted, disappeared for a moment, then returned. The sinking into the bed continued, yet at the same time I was still standing. Two sensations coexisted, a weight pulling downward and a lightness lifting upward. It was impossible to know which was real. Perhaps both. I tried to remember what I had been doing. Was I supposed to put on my shoes, or had I already done so? I looked down. My feet appeared indistinct, sometimes bare, sometimes in socks, sometimes in shoes. The image kept changing, and none of them felt more true than the others. Eventually, everything blended into one. Sounds, shadows, movements, and sensations formed a gray, slowly breathing weave. I no longer knew whether I was still awake or already asleep, and perhaps it didn't matter, for the room around me continued existing, quiet, shifting, and yet always the same, regardless of the state I was in. I turned toward the door and walked a few steps across the carpet. The texture felt thick under my feet, its threads slightly worn at the edges but still firm against my toes. I took hold of the handle, cold metal, and turned it slowly downward. The hinges creaked faintly, not loudly, but softly, as if old wood and greased mechanism agreed with each other. I stepped outside the room. The corridor opened before me, long and narrow. The walls were pale gray, a little unevenly painted, with small scratches and dents revealed where the light from the lamps above each hotel door fell across them. The floor was covered with a dense, dark reddish carpet, its pattern simple and almost geometric. Small squares with worn edges, each containing a woven motif, repeating through the entire length of the corridor. Every step made the fibers bend slightly, and I heard a soft, muted sound each time my foot touched it. The corridor lights were dimmed. The line between walls and ceiling was clearly visible, with small seams and gaps showing that the walls had been fitted in the old way without any modern smoothing. The pictures hanging on the walls were simple, landscapes of forests and lakes. their colors faded from years of light. The frames were painted dark brown, chipped at the corners, and the glass reflected light faintly, so that the details of the images were visible only upon close inspection. I kept walking forward. The door handles I passed were all identical, shining metal, smooth yet slightly worn, with small scratches below them, traces of countless travelers' hands over the years. I also noticed tiny burn marks or dents along the way, on the baseboards and door frames. They weren't large, but together they formed a pattern, a quiet record of the corridor's history. The length of the corridor seemed to stretch, the lights reflected on the carpet, creating a dim glow with every step as I moved across the patterns. Above, the ventilation ducts glimmered faintly with their metallic surfaces, small openings letting out a whisper of air so subtle it was almost unnoticeable. The white wall sockets and smoke detectors stood out clearly in the light, their surfaces clean but slightly patinated by time. Each room door I passed looked the same, the number printed on a shiny metal plate, small scratches on the handle, roughened edges around it. Near the floors, patches of darker color marked spots where luggage had bumped over the years. I took in every detail, every shadow, every reflection on the wall. At last I reached the end of the corridor, where there was an elevator. The doors were closed, a matte steel surface reflecting the dim ceiling lights in soft, uneven bands. To the right, a stairwell spiraled down, its rails smooth and worn where countless hands had glided along it. Somewhere deep below, I heard a faint hum, perhaps the sound of the building's heating system or the echo of a closing door. I stood before the elevator and pressed the button. A pale circle of light came alive behind it. For a while, nothing happened. The corridor remained still, the air dense, as though every sound had been absorbed by the walls. Then, from far above, came a quiet, mechanical sigh. The faint clunk of machinery, cables tightening, something heavy beginning to move. I waited. The hum grew closer, then stopped. The doors opened with a slow, even motion and a faint metallic breath. The interior was small, lined with brushed steel, and the mirror inside repeated the same endless reflection of corridor and sylph. Me standing there, multiplied into vanishing repetitions. I stepped inside. The floor beneath my feet felt slightly springy, a faint vibration humming through it from somewhere deep in the shaft. I turned toward the panel. The buttons gleamed, each glowing softly through a thin ring of light. I pressed L, lobby. A small sound, like a muted beep, confirmed the choice. The doors slid closed. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Then a soft downward glide began, barely perceptible, but continuous. The hum from the machinery surrounded me again, steady, mechanical, strangely soothing. I watched my own reflection in the mirror. The collar neat, the shoulders still straight, the eyes calm. And then, just as the elevator passed the next floor, a thought surfaced. Not loud, not urgent, but definite. I had forgotten my phone. The thought was simple, yet it expanded immediately, like a ripple in still water. At first it was merely a practical realization. The phone lying somewhere on the nightstand beside the glass of water and the brush, but within seconds it began to thicken, gather meaning, form layers. I stared at my reflection. The elevator continued its slow descent, but inside my chest something halted. The awareness of that forgotten object, small, rectangular, silent, spread through me with disproportionate weight. I imagined it clearly. The faint scratches on its screen, the light reflecting across its surface, the outline left by the charger cable still resting beside it. I remembered the precise way I had set it down that morning, face upward, slightly angled, as though it were watching me from the corner of its glassy eye. The elevator hummed. I could have waited until reaching the lobby, walk out, perhaps even leave it behind. After all, it wasn't irreplaceable. I could manage a day, perhaps two, without it. No messages, no clock, no photos, no calendar. The thought brought a brief, peculiar calm, but another thought followed almost immediately. If I left it there, the room would still contain something of me. That single object, inert yet unmistakably mine, would remain on the nightstand like a small witness to everything that had happened since morning. The shirt, the mirror, the brushing of hair, the hum within the skull. It would hold a kind of quiet imprint, as though the room would remember me through it. The elevator slowed. I felt the subtle shift in weight as the movement ceased. The doors slid open. The lobby stretched ahead. Soft lighting, a faint smell of coffee, the low murmur of distant voices. I didn't step out. I stood still. The light from the lobby met the dimmer elevator glow halfway, forming a quiet border. If I crossed it, the day would begin. Movement, activity, the outside world. If I stayed, I could still return upward into the silence I had just left. I closed my eyes. The memory of the room's air returned to me vividly. The faint hiss of ventilation, the pattern of the carpet, the uneven rhythm of my breathing in the half-light. The nightstand stood there, waiting, the glass of water slightly refracting the lamp's glow. The phone, lying beside it, would be dark now, screen blank, but not lifeless. It contained traces, messages not read, alarms set, unfinished notes, names, fragments of thoughts, remnants of other days. It was more than an object. It was continuity, a thread connecting the quiet room to the rest of everything. If I left it behind, what would happen to that thread? Would it simply end, cut cleanly, leaving no sound? Or would it remain stretched between two moments, quietly vibrating in my absence? Would the room remember me as someone incomplete, someone who left too quickly, forgetting the most ordinary thing? I looked again at my reflection in the steel walls. The mirror itself stared back, calm, undecided. For a moment I imagined that he, the reflection, might stay behind to fetch the phone while I continued downward. He would walk back down the corridor, open the door, step inside, and see the room exactly as I had left it. The brush bristles standing upright, the shirt folded, the water untouched. He would pick up the phone, feel its weight, perhaps check if it still held the warmth of my hand. Then he would pause, not sure whether to return to me or remain there forever, beside the nightstand, inside that single room that contained everything I had been that morning. The elevator beeped softly. A voice, mechanical and polite, announced, "Lobby floor." I didn't move. The doors began to close, and in that moment, almost without thinking, I reached for the button with the small upward arrow. The doors opened again. Then the ascent began, slow, smooth, deliberate. The motion felt heavier now, as though the elevator had to lift not just me, but all the invisible weight of that decision, the returning, the re-entering, the willingness to retrace a path already taken. I leaned lightly against the wall, feeling the vibration through the metal surface. It wasn't regret exactly, but something quieter, a sense of realignment, as though the act of returning were part of the original movement all along. Floor numbers glowed one after another. 2, 3. The sound of the machinery softened. The doors opened again. The corridor looked exactly as before, long, dim, and silent. For a moment I stood still, then stepped out. The carpet gave the same muffled sound under my feet. The light struck the same spots on the wall, revealing the same scratches, the same framed landscapes. Yet everything felt slightly different. Perhaps because I now knew I was walking backward through something I had just lived. Each door I passed seemed to watch, remembering that I had already gone by once in the other direction. I reached the door marked 314. My hand found the key card in my pocket. I held it for a moment, noticing how its edge was slightly frayed, how the plastic bent faintly where I had used it before. I slid it into the slot. A small light blinked green and the lock clicked. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was waiting. Nothing had changed. The same air, the same light, the same quiet hum from the vent. On the nightstand, just as I had imagined, lay the phone, flat, silent, a faint reflection of the lamp running along its edge. Beside it stood the glass of water, and next to that the brush. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The sound of the latch echoed softly, precise and final. I walked to the nightstand, lifted the phone, and felt its coolness against my palm. For a brief second, I simply stood there, holding it. The weight was insignificant, yet the act of holding it again restored something that had felt slightly unanchored. The room seemed to recognize me, as if the simple motion of retrieval had completed a loop. The faint hum of the vent, the softness of the carpet, the quiet reflection of the lamp in the glass, all these familiar details gathered around me once more, gently. Like the conclusion of a sentence, I hadn't realized I was still speaking. I turned toward the door, but didn't move immediately. For a long time, I just stood there, feeling both the calm of completion and the dull, strange melancholy of having had to return for something so small. The thought crossed my mind. Perhaps the purpose of forgetting was precisely to come back, to re-enter the stillness, to see the room once more from the other side of absence. Then I finally reached for the handle. The metal felt warmer this time. I didn't open the door again. My hand was already on the handle, my thumb resting against the metal, when I felt a small hesitation, a faint inner resistance, quiet but unmistakable. I let go. The door closed with a soft click, not loud enough to echo, yet enough to mark the moment. I turned back toward the room. The light had shifted slightly. It was still afternoon, but the brightness outside had grown duller, bluer. The air inside felt heavier, as if the room had been waiting with held breath for me to return. I placed the phone gently on the nightstand again. It lay there as before, as if it had never been touched, as though the entire act of leaving and coming back had been imagined. The hum from the vent continued, a quiet, even exhalation that now seemed almost alive. The reflection of the lamp in the glass trembled faintly, rippling as I passed by. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress yield under my weight. The silence of the room was whole again, surrounding me from every side. I thought of the elevator still waiting at the end of the corridor, its doors closed now, perhaps returning to rest at the ground floor. I thought of the street beyond the lobby, of the people walking, the noise of traffic, the smell of air outside. But none of it felt real anymore, only the room did. Everything else seemed distant, blurred, like a story told long ago. I looked at the phone. The screen was dark. I could have pressed the button, woken it, let its white light fill the room again, connecting me to the outer world. But I didn't. The longer it stayed dark, the more it seemed to belong to this silence. Its black screen reflected the lamp and a faint image of my face, but only as an outline, barely there. The thought came, slowly, and without alarm. I could stay. Not forever. Perhaps not even long. Just stay. For now. There was no reason to rush anywhere. No one waiting. No appointment missed. And if there were, it didn't seem to matter. I lay back. The mattress remembered me. It accepted the same weight, the same position, as if no time had passed since before. I placed the phone beside me, on the pillow, where its shape made a shallow impression in the sheet. The light from the lamp fell across both of us, equally. I listened. The hiss of ventilation, the faint hum from the building's pipes, the dull rhythm of my own breathing, all aligned again as they had in the morning. The sounds seemed to return to their original tempo, the pace of the room itself. I realized that perhaps nothing had really happened since I first woke up here. Maybe everything between, the ironing, the dressing, the walk to the elevator, even the descent, had been only a slow expansion of a single thought, whether to stay or to leave. Now the decision was made. It was simple, undramatic. Staying required no gesture, no preparation. It was merely a stillness, a quiet aligning of body and room. The glass of water on the nightstand had not moved, but the light within it had changed. It glowed more softly now, as though diluted by the fading day. I watched it for a while. The surface shimmered slightly, each movement of air in the room leaving a faint ripple. The reflection of the lamp fractured into tiny, trembling lines. I thought about lifting the glass, about drinking, but the thought was enough. The gesture felt already complete in imagination. The phone remained dark. I ran a fingertip lightly along its edge, feeling the smooth border between metal and glass. The surface was cold at first, then warmed under the skin. Somewhere deep within, circuits waited, ready to light up at a touch, to open worlds of color and sound. But I didn't press. It felt right that it stayed silent, a part of the room's quiet machinery, no different from the lamp, the vent, or the hum in the walls. I turned my head toward the window. The curtain hung still, its fabric faintly translucent, the color of dusted ivory. Through it, the world outside existed only as pale suggestion, a diffused light, a rumor of motion, but nothing distinct. I could have gone to the window, looked out, seen the street, the people, the sky. Instead, I remained where I was, half sitting, half lying, the line between wakefulness and rest blurring. It occurred to me that perhaps every room in this hotel was like this, each one containing a person somewhere between leaving and staying, each one holding its own small looping decision, 1,000 rooms breathing in rhythm, each with its own hum, its own silence, its own forgotten phone on a nightstand. I smiled faintly. not out of happiness exactly, more from recognition, as if something inevitable had finally aligned. The air felt heavier now, but gentle. I could feel it moving very slightly across my skin, as though the entire room exhaled with me. I leaned back fully, resting my head on the pillow. The sheets were still smooth, the fabric pressed lightly against the back of my neck, cool, familiar. The hum deepened, or maybe my hearing changed. It became rounder, softer, less mechanical, my eyes half closed. Light filtered through my lashes in thin, uneven lines. I thought of nothing specific, only of the air, the stillness, the faint reflection of the lamp in the glass, and the silent phone beside me. There was no longer a sense of before or after, of whether I was resting or beginning again. The room had taken me back completely. I stayed.